Christmas was meant to silence old resentments, reunite a divided family, and give the youngest royals one peaceful evening away from palace politics. Instead, a single comment from Meghan shattered the gathering within seconds. Catherine did not argue, plead, or wait for permission. She crossed the room, took Prince Louis by the hand, and removed him from the family celebration as stunned relatives watched. What followed was not merely an awkward royal dispute, it was a declaration of boundaries. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. King Charles had arranged the Christmas gathering at Sandringham as a controlled family retreat, hoping familiar traditions and the presence of the children might soften years of resentment. Sandringham is the monarch's private Norfolk estate, long used for intimate royal Christmas celebrations, away from public ceremony. The king believed one calm evening could lower the temperature between William, Harry, Catherine, and Meghan. He was wrong. Catherine entered with one promise already fixed in her mind. George, Charlotte, and Louis would not become symbols in an adult war. William had made the same vow in private, telling her that whatever happened between the brothers, their children would never be used to reopen old wounds. That promise was tested near the Christmas table, when Meghan looked toward Louis and called him the spare who could cause the next royal crisis. The words landed hard. Catherine moved before anyone else could speak. She took her youngest son by the hand and said he would not remain in a room where adults discussed him that way. Louis looked up at her, confused, while she kept her voice steady. The calm made her anger sharper. This was not wounded pride. This was a mother drawing a line. William froze for only a moment. He looked first at his wife, then at Harry, and the room understood that his next step would reveal everything. Charles watched Catherine leave, and did not command her to return. The monarch's silence carried its own verdict. He had not heard a careless joke. He had heard an attack on his grandson's emotional safety. Meghan refused to apologize. She insisted her meaning had been misunderstood, while Harry defended her intention instead of confronting the damage. That choice deepened the fracture. William then stepped away from the table, faced his brother, and delivered a warning in a voice so low that everyone leaned closer. Nothing felt accidental. But before that warning could be understood, the true emotional stakes had to be measured through the four people now standing on opposite sides of the room. The crisis did not begin with strangers, enemies, or political rivals. It began between relatives who already knew exactly where to wound one another. Catherine heard Meghan's words as a mother. William heard them as a future king. Harry heard the reaction through the memory of his own childhood, while Meghan believed she had exposed an uncomfortable royal truth. Between them stood Louis, too young to understand why his name had suddenly changed the mood of Christmas. Catherine's deepest fear had never been about ceremony or rank. She had spent years making sure her youngest son never felt less important than George, simply because his older brother stood closer to the throne. The heir is the child expected to inherit the crown, while the spare is the old and painful label often given to the next sibling. To her, those words carried emotional danger. Louis was not a position, he was her child. Meghan saw the same language differently. She believed the monarchy had used hierarchy to divide brothers, reward one, and leave the other carrying resentment. Her anger came from what Harry had shared about his own childhood, but the comment did not land on an institution. It landed on a young boy who had no part in that history. Catherine led Louis into a private corridor and knelt in front of him. She told him quietly that he had done nothing wrong. The child searched her face and asked whether Christmas was over. For one painful second, she could not answer. Then she steadied her voice and promised that their family celebration would continue somewhere he felt safe. William arrived moments later and found his son gripping his mother's sleeve. The prince's anger changed immediately. Before that moment, Meghan's words had been offensive. Now he could see their effect in Louis's frightened expression. The future king bent down, reassured him, and then looked at Catherine with the silent understanding that this could not be dismissed. Harry remained near the table, but the phrase had already begun to trouble him. Meghan's wording echoed descriptions he had used in private conversations about being raised as the second son. He recognized his own pain inside her comment, and that recognition made the silence heavier. What had been spoken between husband and wife had now been placed on Louis. Catherine then told William this was not the first comparison. Earlier remarks had been ignored to preserve peace, but the Christmas insult had crossed the final boundary. She had stayed silent before. She would not do it again. Charles remained alone at the table. He lifted his glass, set it down untouched, and stared toward the doorway where his grandson had disappeared. The king's regret pointed toward an older incident, one that had convinced Meghan that Louis represented a dangerous repetition of royal history. To understand why those few words carried such force, the family would have to return to the private encounter that first placed Louis at the center of the Sussex grievance. Months before the Christmas gathering, another family occasion had ended with a conversation almost no one witnessed. There had been no shouting, no public humiliation, and no dramatic exit. Yet that private exchange planted the idea that would later explode at Sandringham. Meghan had watched Louis receive affection from senior royals and interpreted the moment through Harry's painful history. Catherine sensed the danger immediately, but she chose silence. By Christmas, that silence had become impossible to maintain. The tension began during a summer gathering in the gardens at Windsor, where the royal children moved freely, while the adults discussed future duties. Windsor is one of the monarchy's main royal residences, used for both official events and private family occasions. Louis interrupted a serious conversation and drew laughter from the group. Charles responded warmly, lifting his grandson beside him rather than correcting him. To Catherine, it was a loving moment. To Meghan, it appeared to repeat an old pattern. Meghan waited until later that afternoon before approaching Catherine alone. She said the palace was creating another spare for entertainment now and resentment later. The word spare is the old label used for the child born after the direct heir, and Harry had long connected it with rejection and emotional damage. Catherine answered immediately. Louis was a child, not a royal pattern, and Meghan was never to define him through her husband's pain. The disagreement hardened in seconds. Meghan believed the princess had dismissed the damage caused by rank inside the family. Catherine believed the Duchess had projected an adult grievance onto a boy too young to defend himself. Neither woman shouted. That quietness made the exchange more dangerous, because both understood exactly what had been said. Harry learned about the confrontation that evening through a private conversation with his wife. He sided with Meghan, arguing that she had identified a real danger before it became permanent. William then called his brother and demanded that Louis be kept out of every argument involving their childhoods, titles, or treatment by the palace. The prince's warning was direct, but Harry refused to accept that his wife had crossed a line. Catherine later received a documented account from a senior palace aide. The same phrase, another spare, had already appeared in private discussions among Sussex advisors. The language had not been spontaneous. It had become part of a wider interpretation of Louis' future, one that reduced his childhood to a repetition of Harry's suffering. Catherine chose not to tell Charles. She feared another rupture, and hoped the warning would be enough. That silence protected the family for a time, but it also convinced Meghan that no real consequence would follow. Later that night, Catherine stood in Louis's bedroom doorway and watched him sleep. She made herself one promise: no adult would ever turn his place in the succession into an emotional weapon again. When the same idea returned at Christmas, she knew the garden warning had been ignored. The past had repeated itself, but the confrontation waiting at Sandringham would be far more direct than anything spoken in that quiet Windsor garden. William did not raise his voice when he entered the private sitting room. That made the confrontation more dangerous. Harry stood beside Meghan, prepared to defend her, while Charles remained near the fireplace, burdened by the knowledge that another Christmas had become a battlefield. William closed the door, placed both hands on the back of a chair, and asked one question. Why had an adult chosen to place his 6-year-old son inside a conflict that began decades before his birth? Charles had ordered the discussion moved away from the dining room before the other children heard more. The private sitting room was meant for family conversation without staff or ceremony, a place where titles carried less protection. Yet nothing felt private anymore. Harry watched his brother carefully. Meghan held her ground. The king knew that one wrong sentence could split the family beyond repair. Catherine stayed with Louis until Charlotte sat beside him and told her younger brother that the tension was not his fault. Only then did the princess return. She entered as William told Meghan that anger toward the monarchy did not give her the right to predict emotional damage for his child. The prince called the comment deliberate, personal, and cruel. Meghan answered that she had been condemning the system, not Louis. She said the phrase had been aimed at the structure that created heirs and spares, not at the boy himself. Catherine stopped directly in front of her. She said intent no longer mattered once a child's identity had been used to make an adult argument. The room tightened around them. Catherine told Meghan that Louis would not return until she acknowledged exactly what she had done and apologized without conditions. No aid stood between them. No prepared statement softened the moment. The Duchess hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any defense. Harry then turned on William and accused him of protecting his children from language he had been forced to carry in public for years. The future king did not look away. He said his brother's suffering should have made him more protective of Louis, not less. Harry had spoken often about the damage of being reduced to a role. Now he had allowed the same wound to be placed on a child. Charles finally stepped forward. He declared that no grandchild would be labeled by rank inside his home. The monarch's support stunned Harry because it stripped away the idea that this was merely another conflict between the two couples. The king had chosen a side, and he had chosen the child. Meghan still refused an immediate apology. She insisted her words had been twisted, pushing the crisis beyond emotion and into the hands of the person who controlled the gathering itself. The argument had exposed the wound, but Charles now faced the harder question: whether preserving Christmas required removing the person who had broken it. For years, Charles had tried to hold two impossible hopes at once. He wanted Harry back within the family, yet he also wanted William's children protected from the bitterness surrounding the Sussex departure. At Christmas, those hopes finally collided. The king could ask Catherine to overlook the insult for the sake of unity, or he could accept that unity without safety was merely performance. His decision would determine not only who returned to the table, but whose pain the monarchy considered worthy of protection. Charles alone held the authority to decide what happened next. As sovereign, he was the reigning monarch, but inside Sandringham, he was also the host and father responsible for the people under his roof. Senior relatives understood the danger clearly. Forcing Catherine and Louis back into the room without an apology would tell every child present that royal appearances mattered more than emotional safety. The silence after the confrontation felt heavier than the argument. Charles remained with William after the others left, rubbing his thumb across the edge of his wedding ring. The king admitted that his desire to repair the family had delayed boundaries that should have been set much earlier. He had mistaken patience for progress, and now his grandson had paid the price. William did not soften his answer. He told his father that Louis could not become the cost of reconciliation. The prince made it clear that Catherine and all three children would leave Sandringham if Meghan remained without apologizing. He was not making a threat. He was stating the line beyond which his family would no longer be asked to bend. Charles felt the weight of Harry's isolation immediately. Asking his younger son to leave could drive him further away, perhaps permanently. Yet the monarch could also see the devastation in William's face, and the certainty behind Catherine's decision. One son feared abandonment. The other feared failing to protect his child. Then the king revealed the detail that changed everything. In a recorded private conversation before Christmas, Meghan had been warned not to discuss succession roles, childhood hierarchy, or the Wales children. Succession is the order that decides who inherits the crown, and the condition had been set to keep adult disputes away from the younger generation. Her comment had not simply caused offense. It had broken a direct promise. Charles also admitted that he had extended the invitation against William's advice. He had personally guaranteed that no provocative remark would be made. That meant the insult challenged his judgment as much as it wounded Catherine. The decision came quietly. Charles summoned Harry and told him that Meghan must apologize directly and without qualification, or both Sussexes would leave before dinner resumed. The line had finally been drawn, but its first consequence appeared not in a palace statement, but in Harry's face, when he realized the invitation had become conditional. The departure happened without ceremony. There were no photographers, public statements, or formal announcements, only hurried footsteps, an unfinished place setting, and a family too shaken to pretend that nothing had happened. Harry looked toward the corridor, where Louis had disappeared, and seemed, for one brief moment, to understand the damage. Meghan remained convinced that her words had been distorted. By the time the front door closed, Christmas had divided into two separate stories, each defined by a different sense of betrayal. Meghan offered to explain what she had meant, but she would not give the unconditional apology Catherine had demanded. Charles listened, then decided that explanation without accountability was not enough. The king understood that a clarification might protect an adult reputation, but it could not undo what Louis had heard, or what the others had witnessed. Harry chose to leave with his wife. He said he would not allow Meghan to stand alone before the entire family, even though that choice meant abandoning the gathering. The prince sounded loyal, but not certain. His words defended her. His face betrayed the cost. Harry reached for his coat and noticed a handmade Christmas card resting near the entrance. Louis had written his name in uneven letters beneath a simple message to his uncle. He picked it up, read it twice, and placed it back without speaking. For one painful second, the argument disappeared, and only the child remained. Meghan still believed she had been punished for exposing the damage caused by royal hierarchy. Harry felt trapped between protecting her and admitting that his own language about childhood had helped shape the insult. He had spent years explaining how labels could wound. Now those same labels had reached his nephew. Catherine heard the departing car while sitting beside Louis. She felt no victory, only exhaustion. Protecting her son had once again required the family to fracture, and that truth cut deeper than anything said at the table. William entered with another blow. Charlotte had overheard part of Meghan's comment and understood enough to know that her brother had been mocked. The future king realized the damage had spread beyond Louis. One remark had disturbed two children and shattered the safety Catherine had tried to preserve. Charles responded before the evening could slip further. He instructed his private secretary to record that future invitations involving the Sussexes would include strict boundaries around the Wales children. A private secretary is the senior aide who manages the monarch's personal and official affairs. What began as a family dispute had now become a lasting household rule. Louis eventually returned to the table. His chair had been moved beside Catherine's, and she placed her hand over his before the meal resumed. The room grew calmer, but nothing was settled. Once the children had gone to bed, the palace titles disappeared, leaving only a grandfather and a mother to confront what had been sacrificed in the name of reunion. Late that night, Catherine and Charles met without advisors, spouses, or prepared language. The celebrations had ended, but neither could escape the image of Louis being led from the room. The king expected anger. Instead, the princess spoke with painful calm about what children remember, not constitutional roles or family strategies. but the moment adults either protect them or remain silent. In that private conversation, Charles finally understood that Catherine's departure had not damaged Christmas. It had prevented deeper damage from being done. Catherine had requested the meeting only after Louis was asleep. She wanted the king to understand that her decision had not been a political move or a challenge to his authority. It had been maternal. Charles arrived expecting demands for formal sanctions, meaning official restrictions placed on Harry and Meghan. Instead, the princess spoke only about the emotional boundary that had been crossed. Catherine then shared the moment that changed the room. In a private conversation with no aides present, she told Charles that Louis had asked whether being the spare meant he would eventually be sent away. The king did not answer at once. He lowered his eyes, and the silence between them became heavier than any accusation. Charles finally admitted that his generation had allowed rank to shape the way brothers and sisters saw one another. He acknowledged that the old language of heir and spare had done real damage, and that failing to challenge it sooner had helped feed Harry's lasting resentment. The monarch had spent years hoping time would soften that wound. Instead, it had reached another child. Catherine answered with quiet force. Inherited pain could explain behavior, she said, but it could not excuse passing that pain forward. Harry's suffering mattered. So did Louis's safety. One could not be protected by sacrificing the other. Charles then made a confession he had avoided all evening. He had invited the Sussexes because he feared losing Harry forever. Catherine understood the fear, but reminded him that protecting one son from isolation could not mean leaving William's family exposed. The king listened because the truth was impossible to escape. The decision followed without ceremony. Charles stated that future reconciliation would begin only after a direct apology to Louis's parents and written acceptance that the Wales children would never again be used in public or private arguments. The boundary would no longer depend on goodwill. Charles reached across the table and looked directly at Catherine. "You were right to take him out," he said. The words carried no qualification and no defense. For the first time that night, the princess allowed herself to breathe. The family had reached its private verdict, but outside Sandringham, one departing car and one missing couple were already becoming a global story. By sunrise, the world knew that Harry and Meghan had left Sandringham early. It did not yet know why. Palace silence created a vacuum, filled by headlines, broadcasters, commentators and crowds searching for meaning in every expression. Then one photograph changed the story. Catherine emerged for the Christmas walk, with Louis holding tightly to her hand. There was no dramatic statement, yet the image communicated something stronger. Whatever had occurred, the princess had chosen protection over performance. News of the Sussexes' departure reached broadcasters before the traditional Christmas appearance. The Christmas walk is the royal family's public journey to church, watched closely because every gesture is treated as a sign of unity or strain. The palace released only a brief confirmation that Harry and Meghan had changed their plans. It said nothing about the comment, Catherine's decision, or Charles's ultimatum. The silence made the story grow faster. One national newspaper printed Catherine and Louis beneath the headline, "A mother's line in the sand." That single image became the symbol of the day. Supporters saw courage. Critics saw another deepening break between William and Harry. Either way, the family's private pain had become public judgment. Outside St. Mary Magdalene Church, the tension became impossible to hide. A woman in the crowd called, "Well done, Catherine," as the princess passed with Louis beside her. She did not answer. She simply tightened her grip on his hand. The gesture was small, but it carried more weight than any official statement. Harry watched the coverage from his temporary residence. He saw his nephew smiling beside Catherine, and remembered the handmade card he had left behind at Sandringham. The contrast struck hard. He had defended Meghan in the room, but the cost now had a face. Louis looked safe. Harry looked absent. Meghan understood something too. The debate was no longer centered on whether royal hierarchy could damage children. It had shifted to why she had directed that warning toward Louis. The argument she believed was about the system had become a judgment on her choice of target. Charles then authorized a carefully worded palace briefing. A palace briefing is an official explanation shared with trusted media to clarify the royal household's position. It confirmed that new boundaries had been established around discussions of the Wales children. No names were used, but the message was clear. The king had formally supported Catherine and William. Public opinion had delivered its response. Still, the final verdict would depend on whether Catherine's action remained a temporary reaction or became a permanent rule. When the headlines faded and Christmas ended, one decision remained, and it would define how the monarchy protected its youngest members from that day forward. The lasting meaning of that Christmas was not that Meghan made a reckless comment, Harry walked away, or Charles imposed another royal boundary. The true meaning rested in the moment Catherine refused to let duty trap her child inside an adult conflict. She did not wait for the king, the future king, or palace advisors to decide whether Louis deserved protection. She acted first as his mother. In doing so, she forced the entire monarchy to choose what kind of family it intended to become. Charles made that choice permanent. The king adopted a rule that George, Charlotte, and Louis could never again be discussed as symbols of succession rivalry during private family gatherings. Succession is the order that decides who inherits the crown, but the monarch now accepted that rank could never be allowed to define the emotional value of a child. The rule was simple, direct, and final. Harry and Meghan were excluded from future intimate celebrations until they accepted the condition and offered Catherine and William an apology without excuses. The decision was not presented as punishment. It was a boundary. Reconciliation would remain possible, but only after accountability came first. Harry eventually sent a private message to William, acknowledging that Louis should never have been tied to his own childhood wounds. The note did not repair the brothers' trust, and it did not erase what happened. Yet it ended his defense of the comment. For the first time, he accepted that pain inherited from one generation could not be placed on another. Meghan maintained in a recorded private conversation that her wider criticism of royal hierarchy had been misunderstood. Still, she accepted that directing the remark toward a child had caused harm. Her distance from the Wales family became a consequence of that choice, not another temporary misunderstanding. Catherine later sat beside Louis as he placed a small handmade decoration on the family tree. He asked whether everyone was still a family. She answered that families could love one another and still need boundaries to remain safe. Her words carried no anger, only certainty. William joined them, lifted his son into his arms, and told him that his place in the family would never be defined by coming first, second, or third. Louis did not have to repeat anyone else's history. His only role was to grow up loved. Charles finally understood what Catherine's intervention represented. The monarchy's future would demand less silence, fewer damaging traditions, and greater protection for its children. The Christmas confrontation did not prove the family was beyond repair. It proved that reunion could no longer be purchased through the suffering of its youngest members. Catherine had not divided the family. She had stopped inherited resentment from reaching her son, and everyone who mattered ultimately accepted that she had been right. That Christmas began with an outrageous sentence and ended with an unbreakable principle. The crown could demand duty from its adults, but it would never again demand silence when a child needed protection. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.